we pose the universal information gap. Why do we feed a browsing animal like a grazing cow, bankrupting ourselves on irrigated hay, when a forgotten volcanic island tree offers 24% crude protein year-round for absolutely free? We introduce the shadow mystery. This leguminous supertree was actively ignored and suppressed by the Northern Hemisphere's agricultural complex because its 30-foot taproot and 50-year lifespan make it mathematically impossible to sell replacement seeds, chemical fertilizers, or bagged feed to the farmer ever again. Goats aren't little cows. They are browsers, not grazers, a difference that shapes everything about their health and productivity. A grazer, like a cow or sheep, spends its day sweeping grass just a few inches above the soil, cropping turf down to the roots. A browser, like a goat, is built for something else entirely. Its split upper lip and agile tongue are designed to pick leaves, shoots, and tender bark from shrubs and trees, usually 2 to 4 feet off the ground. The goat's digestive system is tuned to handle a wide variety of woody plants, tannins, and fibrous leaves, nutrients that grazers would struggle to process. Yet modern goat farming ignores this fundamental biology. The standard feed is ground-level alfalfa, cut, baled, and hauled in at great expense. Farmers pay $300 to $500 a ton for hay that is meant for grazing animals, not browsers. Goats forced onto pasture or fed cut hay from the ground face a double penalty. Their nutritional needs are not truly met, and they are exposed to a hidden enemy, parasites. The larvae of the barber pole worm, Haemonchus contortus, thrive in the first 4 to 6 inches of pasture. Every mouthful taken close to the soil risks picking up a fresh load of these deadly worms, which can devastate a herd with anemia and lost production. The result is a costly cycle: more hay, more chemical dewormers, more vet bills. Meanwhile, the goat's natural browsing instinct is suppressed, and the farm becomes ever more dependent on outside inputs. This is the grazer versus browser fallacy at the heart of modern goat management, a system that treats goats like cows, and in doing so, drives up costs, erodes herd health, and locks the farmer into a treadmill of purchased feed and medicine. The real question isn't just what goats eat, but how and where they eat it. That answer holds the key to breaking the cycle. Every month, the feed bill arrives like clockwork. For most goat farmers, it is a number that keeps climbing: $300, $400, $500 per ton for alfalfa and grain, with no end in sight. The promise of profit is swallowed up by the simple math of industrial feed economics. Goats forced to eat like cows burn through expensive hay and concentrates that were never meant for their biology. Each bale, each sack, is another purchase from the same handful of suppliers who control seed, fertilizer, and feed markets. The cost does not stop at the feed store. Every ton of hay hauled in is money hauled out of the farm. The cycle is relentless: buy, feed, repeat. Even in drought years, when alfalfa prices spike and supply runs thin, the bills do not wait. Meanwhile, the goats themselves are left with feed that does not match their natural diet. The result is more than just a thinner wallet. It is a system that locks the farmer into dependency, making every season a gamble on outside inputs. This is the real cost of ignoring the browser's biology. The numbers are stark. A small herd can rack up thousands in annual feed expenses, erasing margins and pushing family farms to the edge. The industrial feed treadmill is not just a financial burden, it is a structural trap, and for many, it has become so normal that the universal information gap goes unnoticed. The question is not just how much feed costs, but why the system demands it. Breaking free starts with understanding that the pain in the pocketbook is a symptom of a much deeper mismatch. There is a tree most farmers have never heard of, a plant that rewrites the rules of goat feeding, yet rarely appears in the playbooks of northern agriculture. Its name is Tagasaste, known as Chamasitissus palmensis, and commonly called tree lucerne. This evergreen legume traces its roots to the rugged volcanic slopes of La Palma in the Canary Islands, where centuries of drought and thin soils shaped it into a survivor. While the rest of the world defaulted to annual crops and imported hay, the people of La Palma relied on Tagasaste to keep their goats alive through months of heat and hunger. Unlike imported pasture grasses or costly alfalfa, Tagasaste was born for scarcity. It thrives in poor soils, shrugs off long dry spells, and grows without the crutch of synthetic fertilizers. The secret lies in its biology. As a legume, it fixes its own nitrogen, quietly enriching the ground around it. Its growth habit is more shrub than tree, reaching 6 to 20 feet tall, with dense, leafy branches that goats instinctively browse at the perfect height, 3 to 5 feet above the ground. But what truly sets Tagasaste apart is its ability to flourish where other feed crops fail. On La Palma's rocky slopes, it sends down a taproot that can reach up to 30 feet, tapping reserves of water deep beneath the surface. This single adaptation means green leaves in the dead of summer, when pastures turn brown and hay prices soar. For the farmers of the Canary Islands, Tagasaste became more than a feed, it was a lifeline. Its story, largely untold, holds the key to breaking the information gap that keeps most goat keepers locked into a cycle of dependence and expense. Tagasaste is not just another drought-hardy shrub, it is a living feed factory engineered by nature for browsers like goats. What sets it apart from any pasture grass or baled hay is its leaf chemistry. Lab analyses consistently show Tagasaste leaves delivering 20 to 24% crude protein, right in the same league as premium alfalfa. But there is more. This protein is highly digestible, packed into soft, palatable leaves that goats will strip from the branches before touching any hay. Year after year, even on poor soils and without fertilizer, the numbers hold up. Feed test certificates from farms in Australia, New Zealand, and Ethiopia all bear out the same story. Tagasaste matches or beats the nutritional value of the most expensive hay on the market. It is not just protein either. The leaves and young stems are loaded with minerals, calcium, phosphorus, and a full spectrum of amino acids that browsers need for growth, milk, and meat. The digestibility regularly clocks in at 55 to 65%, rivaling the best forages money can buy. For a goat, this means more nutrients absorbed with every mouthful, less waste, and faster gains in both milk and weight. Farmers who have switched to Tagasaste browse report richer milk, higher butterfat, and healthier, faster-growing kids, all from a feed source that grows itself year-round without a single bag of fertilizer or a drop of irrigation. These numbers are not theoretical. They are stamped on feed analysis reports and confirmed in the field, season after season. Tagasaste is not a compromise. It is a direct replacement for the most costly inputs in modern goat farming, and it does it with no strings attached. The chemistry is only the beginning. What happens below the ground will change the entire equation. Tagasaste's secret weapon lives underground. While most feed crops wither when the rains stop, this tree drives a taproot down through layers of soil, reaching depths that leave ordinary pasture plants stranded. Field excavations in Australia and New Zealand have traced mature Tagasaste roots to 10, sometimes even 15 meters, over 30 feet below the surface, depending on soil depth and age. That means, in the middle of a scorching summer, when shallow-rooted grasses are dust and even alfalfa curls at the edges, Tagasaste keeps pumping up water from deep reserves. The leaves stay green and lush, holding their protein and palatability, even as the landscape around them turns brown. This is not just theory. Soil coring data and root pit studies confirm that, in well-drained soils, Tagasaste's sinker roots can punch through compacted layers, tapping moisture that annuals never reach. The result is a living feed supply, immune to surface droughts that cripple hayfields and pastures. Farmers in Western Australia have watched Tagasaste hedgerows stay vibrant after 6 months with no rain, providing leafy browse when everything else fails. For goats, that means steady nutrition through the worst dry spells. No rationing, no panic buying, no sudden drops in milk or growth. A hydrologist once described Tagasaste as a biological drill rig, quietly mining the water table while other plants beg for irrigation. Its deep roots also anchor soil, reduce erosion, and set the stage for a thriving underground network of fungi and bacteria. But the real magic happens just above those roots, where nodules fix nitrogen, turning this drought-defying taproot into a self-fertilizing engine. That's the next layer of the story. Underground, Tagasaste turns its roots into a living fertilizer plant. Unlike ordinary shrubs, its roots form clusters of nodules, tiny bulb-like growths packed with specialized bacteria. These bacteria, known as rhizobia, draw nitrogen straight from the air trapped in soil pores. Inside each nodule, they convert inert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium, a form plants can use. This process is called biological nitrogen fixation, and it is what lets Tagasaste thrive on the poorest volcanic slopes of La Palma without a drop of synthetic fertilizer. Field studies in Australia and New Zealand have measured Tagasaste fixing between 100 and 250 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare each year. That is enough to match several bags of commercial fertilizer, except here, the tree does the work itself, season after season. The benefits do not stop with the Tagasaste plant. Nitrogen leaks out from the nodules into the surrounding soil, feeding nearby grasses and forbs. Over time, this creates a ripple effect. The whole pasture becomes richer, greener, and more productive, even where the soil started out thin and depleted. This self-fertilizing system resets the rules for feed production. With Tagasaste, there is no need to buy urea or ammonium nitrate, no risk of runoff polluting streams, and no dependence on the global fertilizer market. Instead, the farm's fertility is built from the ground up, powered by a symbiosis that has been running quietly for millions of years. This is the foundation that supports year-round growth, especially during the late winter and early spring, when other forages stall. The nitrogen factory running beneath each tree makes Tagasaste not just a source of feed, but a builder of healthy, autonomous soil. Late winter is the hardest season for any goat farmer. Pastures shrink to brown stubble, hay barns empty out, and the cost of keeping a herd fed can spike overnight. This is the hunger gap, the stretch when annual grasses and clovers go dormant, and even alfalfa slows to a crawl. For goats in milk or late pregnancy, those weeks of scarcity can mean lost body condition, weaker kids, and a drop in production that echoes through the entire year. Most farms bridge the gap with trucked-in hay or grain, but every bale is another hit to the bottom line and another reminder of just how fragile the system really is. Tagasaste rewrites this script. Unlike annual forages that vanish with the first frost or drought, Tagasaste is evergreen. Its growth curve does not follow the same rules as pasture. In climates with mild winters, it pushes out a flush of new leaves and tender stems right when everything else stalls. Field data from Australia and New Zealand confirm a late winter to early spring peak in edible biomass, just as the hunger gap bites hardest. While ryegrass and clover are still months from recovering, Tagasaste hedgerows stand green and loaded with high-protein browse, ready for hungry goats. A single mature shrub can produce up to 2.7 kilograms of edible dry matter per year, with the bulk coming when other feed is at its lowest. This steady winter growth is not just a bonus, it is insurance. It means no scramble for overpriced hay, no risky grain rations, and no sudden drop in milk or kid growth. For the first time, the farm's feed supply is anchored in perennial biology, not the whims of weather or the feed market. That's the real promise of Tagasaste, feed security built into the landscape, not bought by the ton. Parasites are the silent tax on every goat farm. The barber pole worm, Haemonchus contortus, is a master of the ground. Its larvae hatch and climb no higher than the first 4 to 6 inches of pasture. Each blade of grass near the soil is a landing strip for infection, and every mouthful taken at ground level is a gamble with herd health. Dewormers and vet visits become routine, but the root problem, feeding goats like grazers, remains untouched. Tagasaste flips this equation. Its dense, leafy branches grow right in the 3 to 5 foot range, far above the larvae zone. When goats browse from these living canopies, they bypass the parasite's entire life cycle. Fecal egg counts are the microscope numbers that measure worm pressure, and they tell the story in hard data. In Australian and New Zealand herds, farmers report fecal egg count drops of 70 to 90% after switching to Tagasaste alley systems. One farmer in New South Wales saw his deworming schedule cut from 4 times a year to just once, with healthier goats and fewer losses. The microscope slides do not lie. Fewer eggs, stronger animals, and less money spent on chemicals. This is not a theory, it is a direct biological defense. Elevating the feed source takes goats out of harm's way, breaking the cycle of infection that thrives in standard grazing systems. The result is immediate: less anemia, faster growth, and a farm that spends more time thriving and less time treating. The vertical defense of Tagasaste is the first step towards a self-renewing, resilient herd, and it is built right into the biology of the tree. Next comes the question of how to manage this living feed engine for decades of productivity. A single planting of Tagasaste can change the entire rhythm of a goat farm. Unlike annual crops or shallow-rooted forages, this supertree is managed by coppicing, a simple, low-labor cycle that fits the natural browsing habits of goats. Once established, the trees are cut back to waist height every 6 to 12 months, encouraging dense regrowth right in the goat's preferred feeding zone. The result is a living browse bank that stays productive for decades. Trials from Australia and New Zealand confirm that with regular coppicing, Tagasaste stands can keep producing rich, leafy fodder for 20, 30, even 50 years. There is no replanting, no tilling, and no fertilizer truck arriving every spring. For the farmer, this means the feed supply becomes nearly automatic. After the first year of establishment, the cycle is as straightforward as it gets. Let the goats browse, cut the trees back when needed, and watch the canopy fill in again. The deep taproot keeps the trees green through drought, while the nitrogen-fixing roots quietly rebuild the soil. There is no hay to haul, no seed to buy, and no scramble when the weather turns. The numbers are hard to ignore. A single planting can outlast an entire generation, with some stands in Western Australia still in full production after half a century. The labor savings are just as real. Instead of chasing feed prices or grinding through endless mowing and baling, the farmer becomes a steward of a perennial system. With Tagasaste, the work shifts from endless input purchases to simple, seasonal management. The return on investment is not measured by the ton, but by the years of reliable, self-renewing feed that never needs to be bought again. The proof is not just in the chemistry, it is in the bucket and on the scale. When goats switch from hay and grain to Tagasaste, the numbers change fast. Milk tests from herds in Australia and New Zealand show butterfat rising by 15 to 25%. That means richer, creamier milk and more cheese yield per gallon without any bagged supplements or feedlot rations. In one New Zealand trial, average butterfat climbed from 4.2% to 5.1% after goats browsed Tagasaste hedgerows for a single season. The gains show up in the next generation too. Kids raised on Tagasaste gain weight up to 20% faster than those on standard pasture or hay. Australian field data puts kid growth at 200 grams per day compared to just 160 grams on alfalfa. That is not a rounding error. It is a leap in productivity that pays out at market. Every extra pound comes from leaves that cost nothing to grow, fertilize, or irrigate. Farmers who have tracked their numbers see the difference in the ledger. One New South Wales operation cut annual hay use in half and slashed deworming costs to a quarter of their previous level. The profit margin widened by over $15,000 per hectare in 5 years. These are not isolated stories. They are backed by trial graphs and feed analysis reports stamped by government labs. With every new data point, the universal information gap grows harder to ignore. If a single unpatented tree can deliver this kind of performance, why is it not the backbone of goat dairying everywhere? The answer lies not in the science, but in the history, a shadow mystery that runs deeper than any root. In the late 1800s, a quiet act of defiance set the stage for everything that followed. On the island of La Palma, a Spanish botanist named Francisco Gonzalez saw the devastation drought brought to his people and their herds. Instead of turning to imported grain or waiting for government relief, Gonzalez gathered seeds from the hardy Tagasaste shrubs clinging to volcanic slopes. He packed them into simple parcels, no patents, no trademarks, no corporate backing, and he shipped them at his own expense to Spain, Portugal, and as far as Australia and New Zealand. The records show self-funded shipments, not a state program or a private monopoly. Gonzalez's gift was radical for its time, a perennial protein-rich tree able to thrive where annual crops failed, offering 20 to 24% crude protein and a taproot that could chase water 30 feet down. Every package of seeds was an open-source challenge to the rising tide of industrial agriculture, a living blueprint for food security that needed no fertilizer, no irrigation, and no permission from above. Northern farm boards and extension agencies never embraced Tagasaste. Their playbook favored annual crops, alfalfa, ryegrass, and clover, plants that fit neatly into the mechanized cycle of plowing, seeding, spraying, and harvesting. Tagasaste, with its 50-year productive lifespan and deep perennial roots, simply did not fit the model. It could not be turned under each fall or replanted every spring. There was no annual seed order to fill, no fertilizer schedule to maintain, and no steady stream of equipment sales to support. Extension bulletins from the 1940s and the 1950s barely mention Tagasaste, dismissing it as a misfit for large-scale machinery. The system was built around crops that demanded constant inputs, synthetic nitrogen, herbicides, and proprietary seeds, all of which kept the quarterly profit cycle humming. Perennials like Tagasaste threatened this structure by offering a one-time planting and decades of self-renewing feed, quietly undermining the economics of the fertilizer and feed industry. After World War II, the fertilizer industry rewrote the rules of agriculture. Synthetic nitrogen, made possible by the Haber-Bosch process, flooded the market and turned once marginal soils into temporary green carpets. By the 1950s, global production of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers had soared from under 1 million tons a year to more than 10 million tons a year. This chemical boom did not just boost yields, it locked farmers into a cycle of dependency. Crops that once relied on legume partners for natural fertility now demanded annual inputs of ammonium nitrate and urea. Extension agents and corporate bulletins sold the idea that true productivity came in a bag, not from a living root. For feed and seed companies, this was a windfall. The profit cycle depended on crops that needed to be replanted, refertilized, and resprayed every season. Perennials like Tagasaste, with their self-renewing nitrogen and 50-year lifespan, offered no recurring revenue. The economics of industrial agriculture quietly sidelined any plant that could break the chain of purchased inputs, setting up the seed monopoly that would follow. A one-time planting of Tagasaste doesn't just disrupt the fertilizer monopoly, it threatens the entire seed market. The economics are simple. Annual crops mean annual sales. Every spring, farmers are expected to buy new seed, renew contracts, and keep the cycle of dependency spinning. But Tagasaste flips that script. Once established, a stand of this supertree can feed goats for 50 years without a single replant. There's no recurring seed order to fill, no subscription to outside inputs. For the companies that profit from yearly turnover, a perennial, self-renewing feed tree like Tagasaste is bad business. It offers farmers a way out, a feed supply that grows itself, fertilizes itself, and breaks the chain of purchased inputs. The universal information gap is not just about what goats need to eat. It is about who profits from keeping farmers in the dark and who stands to lose when a zero-input system takes root. Designing a Tagasaste silvo pasture starts with the layout. Rows are planted 10 meters apart, creating wide alleys that let sunlight reach the ground while still providing enough canopy for shade. Within each row, trees are spaced 1 to 2 meters apart, forming a dense living fence that goats can browse at their natural feeding height, 3 to 5 feet above the soil. This arrangement is not guesswork. Decades of field trials in Australia and New Zealand have shown that a 10-meter alley strikes the right balance, enough room for machinery or rotational grazing, but tight enough for Tagassaste's roots and canopy to support the pasture underneath. Shade is critical, not too much, not too little. About 30% of the area should be under tree canopy at midday. That is enough to cool the herd, reduce heat stress, and slow evaporation, but not so much that grass stops growing in the alleys. The shade also protects soil microbes and encourages mycorrhizal fungi, building a healthier, more resilient pasture from the ground up. Goats use the lanes to move between rows, grazing grass and browsing leaves as needed. The result is a living system that produces feed, shelter, and fertility with almost no outside inputs. Every detail, the row spacing, the shade ratio, the browsing height, is tuned for maximum output and minimum cost, setting the stage for a farm that works with nature, not against it. Rows of Tagassaste do more than feed goats. They stand as living fire breaks in a landscape increasingly threatened by wildfire. In Australia, where bushfires sweep across open paddocks with terrifying speed, farmers have watched Tagassaste hedgerows slow the advance of flames. The secret is in the foliage. Tagassaste leaves hold up to 70% water, making them far less likely to ignite than dry grass or conventional windbreaks. When fire approaches, these green barriers absorb heat and moisture, breaking the momentum that turns small blazes into disasters. During the 2019 to 2020 Black Summer fires in New South Wales, reports surfaced of Tagassaste alleys halting fire fronts long enough for emergency crews to respond. While fences and grass burned to the ground, the evergreen walls of Tagassaste remained standing, scorched at the tips but alive at the core. Farmers credited these living rows with saving livestock and infrastructure, buying precious minutes that made all the difference. Insurance reports may not capture it. The on-the-ground testimony is clear. Moisture-rich Tagassaste hedges act as a buffer, not just for goats, but for the entire farm system. This is a layer of security that annual pastures and dry windbreaks simply cannot match. Each Tagassaste row is a multi-purpose asset, feeding herds, rebuilding soil, and now defending against the growing threat of wildfire. The ecosystem services stack up, turning a simple feed tree into a cornerstone of farm resilience. Beneath the surface, those same roots are busy building a network that holds soil, stores carbon, and supports a living underground economy, a story that begins with fire but stretches all the way down to the microbial level. Beneath every thriving Tagassaste row, a silent partnership is at work. The roots of this legume don't just fix nitrogen, they weave themselves into a living network with mycorrhizal fungi. These fungal threads stretch far beyond the root zone, binding soil particles, trading minerals for sugars, and building topsoil from the subsoil up. In this underground alliance, Tagassaste supplies the carbon-rich exudates that feed the fungi, while the fungi deliver phosphorus, zinc, and other nutrients that would otherwise stay locked away. Over time, this exchange thickens the topsoil layer, boosts organic matter, and restores structure to land that has been compacted or depleted by years of tillage. Field studies in Australia and New Zealand have measured clear gains. Pastures under Tagassaste show higher levels of soil carbon, improved water infiltration, and a greater abundance of beneficial microbes compared to neighboring grass-only paddocks. The difference is visible in the crumbly dark earth that forms beneath mature stands, a sign of living soil, not just dirt. These mycorrhizal networks also help buffer the effects of drought, storing moisture and nutrients for lean times. For farmers, the payoff is long-term. Healthier soil means fewer inputs, stronger pasture growth, and a feed system that improves with every passing year. The real value of Tagassaste is not just in the leaves above ground, but in the underground web that turns a one-time planting into decades of self-renewing fertility. This is the biology that makes zero-input farming possible, setting the stage for a cost model that breaks the industrial feed cycle for good. A decade on paper tells the real story. In a side-by-side 10-year budget, A conventional goat farm racks up line after line of recurring costs. Hay and grain, $5,000 to $10,000 per hectare. Synthetic fertilizer, another $1,000. Chemical dewormers, $500 or more. Each year, the numbers reset to zero and the cycle begins again. By year 10, the total outlay for outside feed and inputs can top $60,000 per hectare. That is money funneled straight to the fertilizer monopoly, the seed monopoly, and the quarterly profit machine that keeps farmers locked in dependency. Tagasaste upends this math. After the upfront cost of seed and establishment, often less than $1,000 per hectare, the major expenses vanish. There are no fertilizer bills because the tree fixes its own nitrogen. Feed costs drop to a trickle as goats harvest 20 to 24% crude protein leaves from living browse year after year. Dewormer use plummets thanks to the vertical defense of browsing at 3 to 5 feet well above the parasite zone in the grass. Over 10 years, the Tagasaste system can save $5,000 or more per hectare compared to the industrial model, and those savings compound with each passing year. The numbers are not just abstract. They show up in profit margins, in the resilience of the herd, and in the freedom of a farm that no longer answers to outside suppliers. The universal information gap kept this vision hidden for generations, but the ledger is clear. Plant once, manage simply, and browse forever. A farmer looking skyward at rows of evergreen Tagasaste doesn't just see feed. He sees the end of the treadmill and the beginning of true autonomy. Today, the universal information gap still divides farmers from a tree that delivers 20 to 24% crude protein, fixes its own nitrogen, and outlives quarterly profit cycles with a 50-year root. Industrial feed monopolies keep goats on the ground, where parasites climb just 4 to 6 inches, while Tagasaste elevates browsing to 3 to 5 feet, breaking that cycle. The shadow mystery is not solved. It is waiting in your pasture. What would you do with true autonomy? Let us hear your thoughts below.